Good morning, everyone. It's nice to see your pretty faces all here and to see that we're on time, it looks like, in spite of our late getting started. So This is good. My job here today is to introduce our speaker for today, Paul Kieltyka. He's president and CEO of the Summit Area YMCA. Paul is a New Jersey YMCA veteran with over 25 years of experience in the Y movement. He began his career as sports director at the Somerset Hills YMCA, progressed through the movement of leadership positions at Metropolitan Y, the Oranges, and Somerset Valley. He became president and CEO of the Summit Area YMCA in 2014, and as a long life Union County resident, he brings a unique perspective of understanding the communities of the Y that the Y serves. Paul grew up as a member of the Westfield Y, where he was experienced firsthand how Y's values and mission positive impacted his youth and his families. He continues to be a driving force behind this work. Paul lives in South Dakota Plains, with his wife Maggie and their two daughters, Megan and Lauren. Let me introduce Paul. Please come up. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the great introduction. What an honor it is to be here today. I'm going to take a second and load up this presentation. For those online, we do have a PowerPoint. So I'm here today to talk about the history of the Summit Area YMCA. This has been an incredible opportunity, and I thank you all for giving us this opportunity, because quite frankly, as a student of history, I love American history, I love New Jersey history, and our YMCA, fortunately and unfortunately, there were years where we have some gaps as far as archives and tracking some history, and there's some years we found some really good things. And those that aren't familiar, my office is at 99 Morris Avenue in Summit, and it's a house. It was a house. And in the attic, like many of our own personal attics, we have boxes and boxes of archives that have been thrown up there over the years. And this project allowed us to open up some of those archives and take a look and see what was salvageable and see what we could try to put together. So this is our first attempt at that, and hopefully you enjoy it. And I certainly will move along and then have an opportunity for questions and discussions afterwards. So we were founded in 1886. The Y movement was founded in London in about 1835. The first YMCA in the United States was founded in Boston about 10 to 15 years later. So that part of the 19th century, especially the latter part of the 19th century, really started to see an explosion of YMCAs. And for those that do not know, the YMCA is an acronym for Young Men's Christian Association. And much of what you see here was exactly what Summit resident Charles Grant wanted to do, which was to help young men in the community find a purpose, or as I like to say, keep them out of trouble. Charles became the founder and the president of the Summit YMCA at that time. And you see, to reach their full potential, to improve their well-being, to inspire action, and to strengthen the community. It's a very simple premise. It was to work with the young future of that time and ensure that they had an opportunity to be educated, to practice their social skills, and to learn the values to go on to become a productive citizen in the community. So at that time, you had to find a physical location. The first location was actually on what is 391, 393 Broad Street today, a small space, only 300 square feet, a little cottage. This certainly was a temporary fix. They were hoping for something that would be more sustainable. So by 1893, they found the Summit House. That's what I call it now. As you may recall, downtown Summit has a new restaurant about 4 or 5 years ago called the Summer House Restaurant. That corner on Springfield and Maple. See if I have a picture here. Oh. For those that are familiar with downtown Summit, it's right in the middle of downtown. Again, on Springfield and Maple on the corner there. And that was the first building, old-time building for the Summit Area YMCA. And that opened in 1893. In 1910, so in 1910, this is quite a fascinating story. Our current building on Maple Street, 67 Maple Street, also on the corner of West Broad, was an empty lot. And at that time, the Y leaders determined that they needed to have a larger space to grow the variety of programming. Up to that point, there was very little physical activity offered. There was a little pool in the original building, but there was no exercise space or physical activity offered for the young men at that time. So a 10-day campaign was launched in October of 1910 to raise money. And this is insane. A total of $75,000 was raised in 10 days from 10 people in 1910. Now, I don't know my inflation as well as perhaps I should, but I think it's pretty safe to say, why don't we say $7,500 to $10,000 in 1910? We're worth a lot of money back then. Maybe $1 million, maybe 500,000, 750,000 at least. Incredible generosity, which really set the tone for the philanthropic efforts behind the YMCA throughout its history. To raise that kind of money, what was then an empty lot, and to build what you see today. Now, we'll go on further and talk about that building has since been expanded, but the original building was absolutely beautiful and was opened in 1912. So the building today is 112 years old, but it did have a lobby, a little gymnasium, which today is the fitness center. She had a game room with pool tables, an 18 by 35 foot pool, going from 3.5 to 7 feet. And that was the first pool built in the city of Summit, indoor or outdoor. Also down the basement, had bowling alleys. Not quite sure if anybody availed themselves of that. Game room. Upstairs on the 3rd floor of the building were dormitories, 19 dorm rooms up there. Back during that time, that was a prime source of revenue for the YMCA, was to have dorm rooms and spaces for young men to live. I assume, I was told, with very affordable prices back then of $2.50 plus for a week. We also had a little lunchroom to serve people meals. So in 1916, there was still some debt left over, a few $1,000s from the original building and some overage costs and adding things to the building after it was built. That was eliminated. Again, thanks to the generosity of the residents. For those that do not know, the YMCA nationally and of course in Summit is a nonprofit. It's a back then this didn't exist, but today it's also known as a 501c3, which means that we do not set out to make a profit. We do not set out to have a surplus at the end of the year. We certainly set out not to lose money, but to support our mission and the things that we provide for the community. We rely on the generosity of those in the community. Our fees, such as a membership fee, a program fee, are things that go right back towards the operating costs of that YMCA. It's no different today than it was back during our early days. in 1929, and a different time, as we are aware, up to this point, the YMCA was only available to basically white men. No women were allowed, no people of color were allowed. Around the country, during the early part of the 20th century, YMCA started sprouting up for African Americans only. They understood the mission, they understood the value of what a YMCA could provide for a community. So African American leaders across the country started establishing their own YMCAs. First one back was established in Washington, D.C. I believe it was 1905. In 1929, the first one was established on Broad Street in Summit. This was the goal of the Lincoln YMCA. Now, at this time, this was a completely separate entity from the Summit YMCA. Again, very similar, except there's one notable difference. Provide a community center for both sexes. So the African American YMCA understood right away that we also want to have something for the woman of the community. And at the time, it was only colored women. So in the 1940s, 1950s is quite a dynamic time for our YMCA. A few things happened. So obviously the war in the early 40s began, women began to join the workforce, and we started talking about the merger with the African American YMCA. So at this time, right after the war started, about 1943, the Summit Area YMCA opened up for women. And quite frankly, it was out of financial necessity as our membership decreased, as many men in the area took off for the war. They suddenly found themselves serving almost nobody. Maybe the children of those men, but they quickly realized that the women needed a place as well. That really was a change in dynamic and what the Y's purpose was in the community. While it was still doing things based around mind, spirit, and body. And by the way, you see the original triangle of the YMCA, it's almost similar to your old guard logo, a straight triangle. The original logo has three sides. And that's what each of the three sides stand for: mind, body, and spirit. So the programming during those years was very much focused on those three. The body is physical activity. The mind was learning, academics, could be career placement, anything in that category. And the spirit was religious, but also at the time in the 1940s, the Christianity became more of a value than it became a religion. So if I could further explain that, what essentially happened was, it did not mean to be a member of the YMCA, you had to believe in the Christian religion. You could be Jewish, you could be Baptist, you could be 25 other religions, atheists as far as we were concerned, because nobody was asking you anymore what your religion was. On Maple Avenue opened up on Friday nights. In 29, the Y, we helped provide money to the African American or Colored Association. That didn't last very long. By 1933, it was decided, okay, we can't help you out financially. We're struggling ourselves. In 1934, Swimming pools were only accessible to white members. They tried to secure a gym and a pool for colored boys. That unfortunately did not go well. Continued to disassociate with that second branch. And then in 1945, an inter-associations committee was formed. You know, if you think about what was happening in society during the 1940s, this was a very brave step in the mid-1940s for those two Y leadership councils and volunteers to get together and start talking about how they could be very efficient. And by 1953, they merged. And it was actually on the third page of the New York Times. It was a big deal. Summit, New Jersey was one of 13 communities in New Jersey that had two YMCAs, a colored Y and a Y, or white Y if you want to be slang about it. One of 13 communities. Summit was the first one in the state to say, enough of this, we're bringing them together. It was met with open arms. As far as we could tell, there was little to no controversy or public protests or anything of that ilk. I'm sure there were people who were not happy at the time, so I'm not going to say that. But as far as history can dictate, it was a rather smooth transition that took place over 7-8 years from the mid-1940s to 1953. Childcare, one of our big programs. And again, the Y has evolved with the country and with the trends and with the culture. Very much during the early history of the YMCA, it has been, let us tell you what we can do for you. We will help you learn, we will help you stay healthy, we will help you stay out of trouble, we will help you get a job. It was very much that people in the community looked at the Y as a place to get help. So childcare, of course, was not childcare in the early 1900s. It really did not exist. And one of the first things that happened in 1954 was Summit Child Care Center opened. Many of you may recall this. That was simply incredible. One of the first child care centers to open up in this area. We can't find any documentation of how many there were, but we know for a fact in Summit Child Care Center was the first child care center in 1954. And obviously, again, the community was demanding it. So you have the war, you have women at home with these kids trying to work, trying to raise them at the same time. The war is over, people came back, and thus started the dual working parents, and understanding that, maybe it's not a great idea to leave my 2- and 3-year-old home alone. So that started. You get a little history here. Roselle Cox provided the first building, which is where the Memorial Fieldhouse in Summit is today. That was intended just for after-school care. So again, this was for children who were going to elementary school from 8 to 3 p.m., but the parents were working to say 5 or 6 p.m. Quickly expanded to full-day care for younger kids, and 21 kids were enrolled, with many more to come. In 58 and 62, they purchased some more land on Woodland Avenue. This was donated by the Summit Junior League. You see the numbers going off. The Junior League helped us pay off the mortgage. And then we purchased land on Morris Avenue, which is 97 Morris Avenue, right next to our house on Morris Avenue, directly across from the Summit Community Center and Bristol Myers Squibb, or what was Selgin. Incredible investment in the 1970s to do that. incredible investment. At that time, most childcare was in smaller facilities out of people's homes. People didn't quite yet understand the importance of having a standalone business for childcare only. We were again ahead of the curve in the 1970s. I want to remind everybody at this point, the YMCA was not involved in any of this. In 1990s, we purchased an additional house, 89 Morris Avenue, which eventually ended up being what today is what we call the Learning Circle Childcare Center. There's two houses that were merged together to form one large childcare center. The Summit Childcare Center over the years in the 1990s and early 2000s was doing pretty well, but realized they really didn't have the resources and the financial stability to operate on their own. They were quite frankly being managed by a group of volunteers, mostly women who were working and just didn't have the time to provide the day-to-day oversight and the leadership and perhaps the growth that they felt Summit Childcare Center needed. So in working with the YMCA at that time, they merged and we came to a wonderful agreement. They had some assets. And as I said, we kept that building and we continue to move forward as the TLC YMCA, or also known as Summit Childcare Center. Before I get into Berkeley Heights here, I also want to step back for a second, because this is a controversial topic of late, of the 1950s, with one more thing on the Summit YMCA in Maple Avenue. There's been a lot of discussion about the Broad Street project and redevelopment and things of that nature. We have been going back in archives trying to figure out why is it that this parking lot belonged to the city of Summit. So when we purchased this property in 1910, for that $75,000, built the building, it was the entire lot, with the exception of where the library was. It was not there at the time, but that little slice of where the library is was not part of that purchase. But the entire lot belonged to the YMCA. After World War II, the city saw, as did the country, a massive uptick in people coming into Summit for the train line and commuting. And they needed parking spaces. And they asked the YMCA if they could use what was then a baseball field as parking. And so the YMCA leadership said, sure, as long as we can use what is now the Village Green across the street for our young kids to play soccer and baseball, and the city said fine. So in 1953, the YMCA donated a baseball field to the city of Summit that was turned into a parking lot. That eventually was a parking lot that we all pay to use. In fact, also in 1961, the YMCA actually sold, maybe they got smothered because they were in financial dire straits at the time, a 20-foot by 80-foot strip of land that ran along West Broad Street so that they could widen West Broad Street. At the time, West Broad Street was only 2 lanes. They were making it 4 lanes, and the YMCA provided space for them to do that. It's fascinating history to go through. We were looking at the cooperation between the YMCA and the city of Summit. It's a wonderful history. It's been beautiful. There's been hardly any acrimony we can find. We work hand in hand with the city of Summit, and we want to continue to do that today. But a lot of people ask, why was that parking lot donated? And we cannot find anything, a deed, an agreement. I personally think it was one of those things on the back of a napkin that was dealt with in 1953. It's interesting. Okay, moving on to Berkeley Heights. So our service area, what became a service area in the 1950s and 60s, started to expand well beyond Summit. It started to include Springfield, Short Hills, Milburn, New Providence, Berkeley Heights, Sterling, and Gillette. It became a pretty significant service area. So there's YMCA's all around us in New Jersey. Matter of fact, there's 30 YMCA's. And in this part of New Jersey, I don't have to tell anybody here, notably overcrowded, and was growing at a fast pace. More and more Ys were fighting for different areas to serve as these neighborhoods were really cropping up, especially the young families. That was a service area that was carved out through some type of agreement in the 1940s and 50s. And so we realized that having just one physical location in Summit was not going to work for folks who wanted to come from New Providence or Berkeley Heights necessarily. So we opened up a branch in Berkeley Heights in a lease building on Springfield Avenue in 1995. And we continue to do that through the years. When I came here in 2014, the big discussion was we can't continue to pay a lease for a building that was never really meant to be a YMCA. It didn't have a pool. It had a very tiny gymnasium, a very substandard fitness center, had a little childcare. It was a medical office building before we took it over in 1995. So, and we were paying a lot of money for it, and we were, quite frankly, not meeting the bottom line of you were losing money on it every year. So the hunt began to try to find a permanent location for the Berkeley Heights YMCA. And over those 2014 to 2017, we scoured about 5 different locations in and around Berkeley Heights to perhaps build the next future Berkeley Heights YMCA. And one thing I quickly learned is that Berkeley Heights is one big wetland. There is very little of any space in Berkeley Heights to build on, at least according to the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. Around the end of that time, the Berkeley Heights Community Pool, which is very similar to the Summer Child Care Center, born and created out of the good hearts of volunteers in Berkeley Heights in about 1965, suddenly realized that, well, suddenly, but they have been realizing for quite a few years that 1, they didn't have the manpower to operate this pool. 2, they were falling behind in capital repairs, so they too were losing severe amounts of money. And we, as a YMCA, a leader in aquatics, we knew how to teach aquatics, we knew how to run pools, could perhaps be in a good position to run their pool. We did that. The next year they said, take it over completely. We don't want it. Take it off our hands. For all intents and purposes, we bought that pool for $1. Now that pool does not belong, that land, I should say, on Locust Avenue did not belong to them. They had entered an agreement with the Township of Berkeley Heights in 1965 to rent that 17-acre property for $1 a year. The land was not ours, but the pool was ours for $1. And it maybe was worth $2. It was really in a state of disrepair. So we signed over the years, worked on negotiations. You can see up here in 2017, we worked with Berkeley Heights. We signed a 50-year lease with Berkeley Heights. It is not $1 a year. It is right now, but it will increase over the term of the lease, with the intent that we finally have found our property to build the Berkeley Heights YMCA. So I mentioned it's 17 acres. 15 and a half of those acres are completely untouchable as far as building. So we had a very big challenge of building on a mountaintop. And as part of our deal with the Township of Berkeley Heights, which does not own its own community pool, we had to rebuild a new pool. But we are not necessarily looking to have an outdoor pool, but that was kind of the deal that we had. If we wanted to have this property at the down of 5 other properties, then we could have it for a lease price, but we had to do it with very limited land, and we had to build another outdoor pool. We certainly could not keep the pool that we had, as it was only probably years away from basically sinking itself into the ground. So we did indeed launch a campaign to break ground on a new building in Berkeley Heights in 2018. I wish you could see the pictures here of the new building. We did construction. The building was about a $13 million building. The pool was about $1.3 million, the long course pool. We're talking a lot about the weather. It got a lot of use the last 5-6 days, I can tell you that. It's been a great community spot for a lot of people. The building is beautiful, state of the art, open. We had the good fortune of opening our building on February 6, 2020.
Good luck.
Everybody knows what happened 5 weeks later, right? So that was tough. That was really tough. It was tough for everybody. And I'm not going to sell you a sob story. We all suffered in one way or another, but it was 2 years, 3 years of excitement to get to that point. We finally opened, and as quickly as we opened, we shut down for the next 9 months. I did all facilities for the most part. Some of the programs I want to talk to you about real quick is the Achievers program. It was founded in 1994. Achievers program very much takes what our founders wanted to do with the young men in the community, only it's young men and young women. And that is to give them a start, to give them an opportunity to be with each other in a social environment where they can learn, where they can be educated, and where they can prepare for their future, whatever that may be. For many of these kids, it's going to be something about how to complete high school and test and move on to college. For many of them, it's about career placement. It's also an opportunity to talk about the social topics of the day among our youth. In 1994, this was founded primarily as a program called Black Achievers, where a majority of the largest minority in 1994 were African Americans or Blacks. Today, it's Hispanics. Today, we don't have any requirement that you be Hispanic or be Black or brown or white. It's open for everybody. And really, we're looking for a community that's underserved in some way that can benefit from these programs. It's completely free for these kids. And today we have over 280 teenagers that are part of this program. We began a cardiac rehab program in 2005. If anybody's been through a cardiac event, you may have heard of phase 1 and phase 2 and phase 3 of cardiac rehab. This is basically phase 4, which is never ends. It allows you to continue in a less unmonitored environment. Those first 3 phases require a nurse to oversee you, or an RN or a doctor. Phase 4 is allowing you to kind of integrate into the general population fitness center, but we also keep tabs on you and give you advice and counsel on how to proceed. In 2000, this is actually a bit incorrect. It's about 2016, we became the first DIG innovation network-wide. What DIG stands for is diversity, inclusion, and global. So I should have said this in the beginning, but Summit YMCA is one of approximately 800 YMCAs in the United States. We are a federated structure, and we have a corporate office in Chicago. We can do what we want to do as a Summit Area YMCA. We are run by volunteers, and volunteers help guide me and my team and strategically in how we want to serve the community. If I want to build a NASCAR track here in New Providence for race cars, so be it. But the one thing I can't do is ignore the brand. And we have to make sure that the brand of those 800 Ys is synonymous with what people understand it to be. So again, you can't see it on these presentations, but as being part of the national movement, which we pay dues for, also allows us not just marketing support, but legal, risk management, training for our staff, board governance, countless other materials, which is what a huge advantage it is in this movement to have a backbone in Chicago that can provide resources upon resources that most nonprofits in this area cannot avail themselves to. The Chicago office in about 2010 started allowing Ys to go through a lengthy few-year program to determine if they wanted to have a little more emphasis of their programming on diversity and inclusion. We went through that process, we completed that process. We're the first Y in New Jersey to go through that process. And what that basically says is, my bottom line on that is we are going to respect all. We're not taking any political or social justice stance. We're an apolitical organization, but we are going to respect all. We will not turn anybody away based on their inability to pay. We will respect all in our community. That's a commitment that our volunteers and our staff live by every day. Very proud of this designation. In 2011, we launched the Live Strong program, which is for cancer survivors. It's a wonderful program that allows anybody who's gone through any type of cancer treatment to begin recovery in an environment with other cancer survivors. Number one, we have a social network. And number two, in a physical fitness environment that is conducive to whatever your medical condition is. Another big thing, and this is happening way, way too often in this state and in this country still today. Too many kids are drowning. And it breaks my heart because one of the most preventable things that we can do as a society is make sure that every kid knows how to swim. It's just a shame to see, and whatever body of water, the backyard pool, the ocean, the lake, it's just a shame to see. So a few years ago, we started a program where every second grader in this service area I talked about, we don't care if you pay or not, that's irrelevant. We just want to make sure that you get the opportunity to learn how to swim. Also, around that time, we also realized that, and again, many folks here probably understand this, while people across the United States don't, when they look at a Summit or a Chatham or a Mendham or New Providence or Short Hills, the last thing they may think of is that Summit has some type of anti-hunger program or problem. It's massive. It's massive. There's way too many kids and families in our communities that are going to school hungry, that are waking up hungry. There's over 275 families in Summit today that are on free and reduced lunch program. There's way too many. We're not going to solve all that, but we can help them. If we all know that a kid who comes to school is hungry is simply not going to be on equal footing with a child who is not hungry. So we started a backpack program with many of our collaborators in the community, again, with the philanthropic support of so many, which basically allows us to bring a backpack to every child who's in our free and reduced program in Summit. You drop it in their backpack at school on Friday. They go home, and in that backpack may be pancake mix, pasta, some perishables, maybe some fruit and vegetables. It's a pretty sizable backpack of food that could feed a family over the weekend. Again, it may not be solving all those issues, but it's certainly helping them. During the pandemic, we stepped up these efforts as more people were suffering from hunger, and we continue to do that today. We work with the city of Summit and Overlook Hospital on the corner of a bar. You may see a garden there. That's a community garden. We grow a lot, especially in this weather, a lot of great produce, which Gardeners can rent out a plot and keep for themselves. Many of our plots end up going to the food banks or to the local, St. Teresa's, other places in this community that could use help in feeding some people with fresh fruit and vegetables. And then last but not least, I just want to mention that we have branched a little bit more intentionally into Springfield. We have taken over the community pool right there next to 78. We run the community pool and summer camp, and we'll be doing that for the next couple of years. Here you see is what we have turned into since 1886. Is Summit Area YMCA is really the London Circle, Berkeley Heights Y, Springfield Community Pool, and my office and association services. And last but not least, I just want to make sure again that you all understand that, I am they call me a president and CEO. I am simply a blessed person to be able to have this role for a short amount of time. And someone else will follow me and they're going to do a wonderful job too. But the people who kept this going throughout the entire history of the Y has been the volunteers. My board of trustees, they are my boss. They are the ones who hire and fire me. They are the ones who help set the tone financially. They are the ones who help us raise money. They are the ones who help set the tone strategically. They set up policy. These volunteers give incredible amounts of time and energy and dedication to the Y and its mission. And for that, there have been thousands over the years. Looking through board minutes of the 40s and 50s, a typical board meeting opened with a prayer and went right to the treasurer or the finance chair. And the finance chair continued the prayer. No joke. 30, 40 years, from the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, this YMCA was on the brink of bankruptcy. It barely survived. And yeah, I just want to add that last thing I believe I left out. In 1996, they finally were able to get stable and strong enough and raise money from the community. And that's when we did the expansion of the Summit Y and adding a gymnasium, adding a second pool, redoing the locker room, et cetera. And that's the building you see there today. And that has been a godsend, and that's something we continue to build on today. We're looking to do more work in there. But that took 60, 70 years of dire straits to get to. We are very fortunate today in 2022 to be on pretty stable ground, even after 2 years of backbreaking restrictions and things of that nature. We are a social organization. We like to bring people together. Even for those of you on the Zoom, we're still together. If we can't bring people together, we cease to exist. So COVID restrictions certainly were difficult on us, but I'm proud to say we survived. So with that, I will pause and allow any questions or comments. Ronnie, thank you.
Okay, any questions from you?
Mike Martin,
Great question. So first, should I repeat that for the people on Zoom?
please
So the
do.
first question was about transferable memberships among YMCA's or 800 Ys I was talking about. We are indeed part of the nationwide membership. So if you are a Madison Y member, you can use the Summit Y up to 6 times a month. Go to Westfield 6 times a month. Any other Y that you want to use up to 6 times a month. If you start coming in every day, we're going to say, wait a minute, join our Y now. Obviously we're going to catch on to that. But 99.9% of the people use it, they use it smartly. They have a home Y and they pay their dues there. But again, yes, your membership is valid. I don't want to say every Y, but I believe it's somewhere around 725 of the 800 Ys are part of that nationwide membership. So when you're on the road, if you're a member of the Y, don't be afraid to go in that Y and ask if they accept the nationwide membership, and they hopefully will help you. Second question was, when did we start using the dormitories upstairs? Great question. It stopped right before we did that renovation in 1996. All the way through the early 90s, the space got smaller as we started needing more and more program space. So somewhere in the mid-90s that the dormitory living stopped. There are still resident YMCA's, matter of fact, Newark and Patterson and Elizabeth still have dormitory style buildings in their associations.
Anyone online?
Yeah, Paul,
Paul,
Go ahead.
yeah, can you hear me?
we hear you.
Oh, great. Well, thank you so much, Paul, for coming and telling us this wonderful story of this tremendous resource that we have and the great work that your predecessors have done and that you're carrying on and your enthusiasm and dedication. It is really quite wonderful. And I'd like to let you know that this Summit Old Guard and the Summit Y have a close historical connection. And that is because the Summit Old Guard was founded on December 2nd, 1930 by a gentleman by the name of E. Marvin Hibbard and 30 of his friends. And it was founded at the Summit Y. We recently, for our 90th anniversary, did a deep dive into our archives and pulled out these historical materials. And we have the founding documents, and the document of incorporation for the Summit Old Guard or association was signed at the Summit Y. And not only that, but the Summit Y continued to host Old Guard for several decades without charging us any fee at all. Most recently, one of your predecessors by the name of Ken Pearl was a real champion of the Old Guard. And by the time I joined, he had already retired and moved south, but I've talked to him on the phone and he just loved Old Guard. And he was our guardian angel at the Summit Y to make sure that we got our space and we weren't going to be charged. And so in a very real sense, the Summit Old Guard, the Summit Y was the incubator for the Summit Old Guard. And we regard ourselves as one of your biggest successes. And if you'd like, I will send you some of our founding documents that involve the Summit Y, and you can add them to your archives. Thank you.
That's great, Paul. Thank you. Can I charge you back rent? Is that possible? So what's the connection between the connections? So the question was a connection in the Y, is there any partnership? Sure, they're coming up on 100 years, I believe, either this year or next year. Crazy, right? Because they started as a YWCA. Many of you may remember that. I'm not quite sure when they stopped. I think in the 70s or 80s. Some of you may not. But over the years, we were not able to find much collaboration between the connection and the Summit YMCA. I can tell you, starting in the 80s and 90s, there was a much more formal collaboration. We would share programs. If somebody's full broke, we'd send our members over to there. If someone's doing construction. And to this day, I talk regularly with my counterpart. Our boards talk to each other from time to time. So there's a much more collaborative relationship today.
Anyone online, Joel?
No, nobody online.
Let's see, Dick?
I have a question about the brand. I was a member of the Madison Y.
Mhm.
Nowhere did I see YMCA. Everything was Madison Y. Is that a brand that's to be continued throughout, or what comment on the difference between the branding of
Yeah.
YMCA and Y?
Great question is about the brand and whether it should be visible. It should be visible, at least to the public in some form or another. You know, so yes, I don't know. I'm not quite sure. I've seen Madison Y over the years and a beautiful new renovation they just completed. And I think they do a pretty good job of displaying the Y logo. You may just not be seeing it everywhere you could be, but it should be front and center.
The Y logo, I don't see YMCA.
Oh, well, the Y logo is the YMCA. Does that make sense? So it doesn't, we don't say YMCA anymore, just Y.
That's the brand.
Matter of fact, the terminology most people go on today is the Y. Yes, sir.
Ed,
Back, stand up. I can't speak for what Gateway Y does. Yeah, each Y, again, what I was trying to say at the end is each Y determines what it's going to do for the community and
See, through their membership, I can use your building 6 times.
yes. And the Westfield Y was part of the Indian Guides, and the memories I have of my father and my friends doing that were immeasurable. Culture wars or not, the Indian Guides name was dropped sometime in the early 2000s, and it called the Explorers. And unfortunately, I believe with that name change started to decrease the popularity of the program, because people like us who went through the Indian Guides didn't make the connection that the Explorers were the continuation of that. And so we have plenty of programs for families at our Y, but things are not exactly like that. For those that don't know, Indian Guides are really much based on camping and going out for weekends with your kids. It was a wonderful program. So here in the green shirt, yes.
Your budget is from grants.
Sure. So the question is size of our budget and grants and how much of this, this is a real tricky question, because I can answer that pre-COVID. I can answer that COVID, and I can answer it post-COVID. So pre-COVID, the size of our budget was about 19 million. And philanthropically, between grants and fundraising, we were about $750,000 a year of that 18 million was coming in through that. During COVID, we dropped down to about 10 or $11 million in 20 and 21. However, we also received substantial grants from the federal government and the state. You may have heard of the PPP, employee protection, and ERTC, to the tune of several million dollars. That very much did help us pay our staff and stay in business for a solid 1.5 to 2 years of the pandemic. Today, we are about $16 million, and philanthropically, the grants and money that we raised is over $1.3 million. And that does not include any more state or federal funding. Anyone else?
Okay.
Paul, thank you so much. I was intrigued by one thing you said, the $75,000 of donations back in 1910. And so I couldn't resist looking it up. Prices have increased 32-fold since 1910. So a $7,500 donation would be the equivalent of a $240,000 donation today. I always knew there were some well-heeled folks in Summit, but this really brings it home. And now John Dory will be here to thank Paul.
Paul, as you may know, we have two different ways of saying thank you. One is a certificate, and the certificate, which is on the screen behind me here, has or will have there it is, in the lower right corner is a flower. It's an orchid. We were founded in 1930, as you heard. And at that time, Summit was considered the orchid capital of the eastern part of the United States. So we adopted that, and we've managed to stick with it for almost 100 years now. It's been very good. So one is we will give you this. The second is, if you all will stand, we give you an old guard salute.